I already have a few of my next couple videos recorded, so be on the lookout for my best of 2024 video coming out by the end of January.
We really suck. You got that right.
2024 was a great year that took a swift nosedive in the beginning of November. 2025 could most generously be described as a mixed bag so far. Speaking for myself personally, I got sick on New Year's Day and woke up at 3 a.m. the next morning puking my guts out. Then I puked them out some more later that night, and then I got a cold a week later, and then right as I was finally making my way out of that, I caught that big flu that's been kicking everyone else's asses these past few weeks. And then January sent me one last parting gift in the form of getting to sit in a hospital room and listen to my grandfather take his last breaths. But I also hit 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, so yay. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this year hasn't been too great. But honestly, I'd rather not just sit back and think about how bad things are right now. I just want to spend some time talking about the things I love. And one of those things I love to talk about is movies. Plus, I just started therapy last month, so I can talk about all that bad shit in an office 10 minutes away from me on Mondays. So, enough doom and gloom, let's have some fun. This is my top 10 best movies of 2024.
That's it, baby. Let's go! All right, let's do it. You heard him.
Number 10, Better Man. Did I know who Robbie Williams was before I first heard about this movie? No. Did I fully understand the creative choice to depict Robbie as a monkey? Also no. Did this movie still rock out loud? Oh, you bet it did. Musician biopics are some of the tropiest movies you'll ever watch, and for my money, Better Man is no exception, and that's why it's so great. It's all the greatest hits of every musician biopic, the chance encounters with other great musicians, distant family members that our main character is desperate for the approval of, said main character dealing with imposter syndrome that's heavily self-medicated with sex and drugs, said main character plays the most epic show ever while in the middle of their lowest personal point, then goes into rehab and reconnects with everyone that's been hurt by their actions. It's really good stuff. But what really helps stick the landing is two things. One, Robbie's delightfully snarky narration where he makes sardonic comments on the people in his past and comments on how they were always kind of a dick. And two, it spices up the formula in a way similar to Dexter Fletcher's Rocket Man by adding more fantastical elements to the story. Like, for instance, and spoilers for the film, there's an entire sequence where during the third act, Robbie imagines himself fighting past versions of himself during his famous 2003 performance at the Knebworth Festival in Knebworth, England, until finally culminating in him killing a version of his present self. And this, of course, leads into the sequence with Robbie checking himself into rehab, where he decides to become a, better man. It's a really terrific film, and honestly, the versions of the Robbie songs in the film definitely have me curious about the rest of this guy's work. Congratulations, Britain, you managed to convert one more filthy American to Team Robbie. Number 9, Woman of the Hour. Cheating a little bit with this one, since technically this was a festival release in 2023, but didn't get a wide release until 24. Woman of the Hour follows Anna Kendrick as an aspiring actress in 1978 named Cheryl Bradshaw, who pops up on a game show called The Dating Game. The premise of the show is pretty simple. A woman and 3 men will all sit on the stage together, with a divider separating the men from the woman. And the woman asks the men a series of questions to determine whether or not any of these guys would actually make a good fit for her. And here's where it starts to get wicked. One of the male contestants on the show isn't an ordinary man. This man is none other than real-life serial killer Rodney Alcala, who was convicted of 8 murders and is speculated to have committed a whopping 130 murders total. The thing I found interesting about the film at a certain point was the fact that Rodney's answers frequently painted him as pretty clearly Mr. Right, despite the fact that we know he's a monster. And honestly, it made me think of guys like Joss Whedon or that miserable excuse for a human being who directed It Ends With Us and abused Blake Lively on the set of that film. So many guys are experts at pretending to be decent people while secretly being the most vile creatures who ever existed. And Daniel Salvato, as Rodney Alcala, is exemplary at that. He almost fools you into thinking he's actually a decent guy, but Rodney just can't help but let the mask slip at times. I especially like the fact that screenwriter Ian McDonald and director Anna Kendrick actually chose to use these little moments to humanize some of the other male characters in the film. On The Dating Game, Bachelor number 1 comes off as a real pig who only sees women as sex objects. But the moment Rodney decides to toy with him by showing one of the photos of his victims, he makes a point to warn Anna, as our main character Cheryl, to be careful with this guy. Bachelor number one might be a pig, but he's not a monster, and that's important. And I think the most galling thing about the whole movie is the fact that the ending reminds us of how just absolutely useless the police and really our society as a whole are about this sort of thing. Nicolette Robinson plays a woman whose friend was abducted and murdered by Rodney, and she tries to warn the security on the set of the dating game about him, but instead they just waste her time on purpose. She then tries to go to the police and tell them about Rodney, and they do nothing. And then another poor woman is abducted by Rodney. He tries to kill her, and he does some other horrible things to her, but she survives and gets him arrested, only for him to be let out on bail and go on to kill 2 more people. Rodney was on the loose from 1971 to 1979. You don't get to kill 130 people over 8 years without a lot of other people connecting the dots and trying to tell the police, hey, I think this guy is doing some really horrible stuff. You guys really need to look into him. And yet for 8 years, these useless donut munchers did jack squat.
What a sick joke!
It's infuriating. And shout out to Anna Kendrick for putting this together. It's especially great work for a first-time director. I hope to see more work from you working behind the camera, ma'am. I think you've got a future in it. Number 8, Godzilla x Kong. The giant monkey and the giant lizard with radiation powers fought another giant monkey and another giant lizard who had ice powers. 10 out of 10. No notes. Number 7, Trap. And now we change gears back to serial killers. This time, instead of the serial killer being a pathetic man-child enabled by incompetent law enforcement and misogynists who refuse to believe women, it's a serial killer who's depicted as a conniving mastermind who can Bugs Bunny their way through any kind of shenanigans. Admittedly, this is more fun than a real guy who hurt real people. Josh Hartnett plays a suburbanite dad who loves his kids, loves his wife, volunteers with the local fire department, makes corny jokes, and is secretly a horrific serial killer who suffocates people and then cuts them into pieces, and the vets are onto him. So the rest of the film is Cooper doing everything he can to evade capture right up until the bitter end. It's equal parts frustrating in that Cooper just keeps getting away with it, and darkly comedic in that Cooper just keeps getting away with it. Josh Hartnett is particularly great at playing both halves of this character, the sitcom dad archetype and the sadistic killer. And he's especially great in the middle of the film where the two characters are sort of merged, because he's let someone in on his secret as a method of coercion, but he's still actively trying to keep up the mask in front of his family. The movie is packed to the brim with twists and turns. If you haven't seen it yet, definitely get a watch. You're either going to tear your hair out watching it, or laugh your dang head off. Number 6, Civil War. When I first saw the alliances made in this movie, I was kind of scratching my head. What do you mean Texas and California are allies against the rest of the United States? That doesn't make any sense. But then I actually saw the film, and while the factions Alex Garland created still don't make sense, they aren't necessarily the focus of the film. The film isn't necessarily even about the conflict itself, it's about the idea of all these bloody awful conflicts that happen a world away from us in countries like Libya and Syria, but they're suddenly happening on our streets and in our towns. It's about how insane and how horrifying it is that conflicts that we in the States aren't supposed to see, we aren't supposed to worry about them because they're happening over there, but now they're happening right here. And that's scary. That's scary as all hell. And also, the final exchange of dialogue in the movie is some of the coldest stuff I've ever seen in a film. I won't spoil it, but good lord. And I thought Wagner Moura was cold as death in Puss in Boots. Yeesh. And before we move into my top 5, I'd like to discuss a few dishonorable mentions. These are the movies I saw this year that made me just go, dude, are you serious? You really want to go that route? Come on. Number 1, Here. For the most part, I actually really enjoyed this movie. It wasn't until the very last scene that things really fell apart for me. You see, the gimmick with Here is that it's a drama set in one location, and it follows a whole bunch of different families who lived in that location throughout time. But mainly it follows Tom Hanks and Robin Wright as a husband and wife living with Tom's mother and father, played by Kelly Riley and Paul Bettany. And throughout the film, Robin is repeatedly all but begging her husband to move with her into a new home because she does not want to keep living in this space anymore. She wants for her and her family to have a house of their own. Tom keeps saying he just can't do it for one reason or another, until Tom's parents eventually move down to Florida and bequeath ownership to Tom. And Robin still isn't content living in this space, and eventually she and Tom split up. Until we roll around to the present day and we find out that Robin is now suffering from dementia. Tom brings Robin back to their old home in the hopes of jogging her memory, and eventually succeeds by talking about their daughter. And in her joy at having remembered anything about her life, Robin declares, "I love it here." And that's where Eric Roth and Robert Zemeckis lost me, because that isn't true. She did not love it there in that home. She hated it. What she loved was the people she shared that home with. But the home itself, she desperately wanted to leave it behind. And you can say that's the point, and I'm pretty sure you'd be right, but I would say I just disagree with that being the point. If you're having a really lousy vacation, but you're surrounded by people you love, that doesn't mean you had a good vacation. If you had a really bad high school experience, but you still made some really good friends that you still talk to, that doesn't mean high school was actually a good time for you. If you had a job that sucked, but you had great coworkers who you love to see every day, that doesn't mean your pay, your hours, and your working conditions were good. You can be surrounded by people you care about and still feel suffocated by the place you live in. Robin needed to move. She wanted to grow and stretch beyond her husband's childhood home, but her husband was either too insecure, too cautious, or too nervous to take that big leap with her, and that's why they eventually split up. Robin saying, "I love it here," is as insincere gets. Number 2. Joker Follet a Jew. This one comes out to my homegirl Iris from Jolly Old England. She saw this movie before I did, and she absolutely hated it. And when I finally saw it for myself, I completely understood why. If you're a fan of the series BoJack Horseman, you might remember how, at the end of the 4th season, the show had the character Doyen Nguyen act as a bit of an author surrogate to remind the main character that he's a horrible person who should not be admired by anyone, and by extension, tells the audience, hey, if any of you actually like this guy, if any of you feel like you have something in common with this guy, you need to work on yourself, because this is not someone you should admire. If you relate to his flaws, you should not be looking at that and thinking, oh, I guess I'm okay. You need to look at that and then work on healing and self-improvement. Do not feel reassured because you're not the only one who feels these things. Think, I need to work on myself. And I think Todd Phillips and Joaquin Phoenix might have been thinking something along those lines when making Joker 2, but instead of reminding people why the Joker is an irredeemable monster, Todd and Joaquin chose to backtrack on who the Arthur Fleck character from the first film had become. Instead of just surrendering himself to this new persona and diving deeper into becoming something even more vile and even more sinister, these creators chose to have Arthur admit that this was all the product of a really bad manic episode, and that he's ready to face the music now. Which, in and of itself, isn't necessarily a bad idea, but it really begs the question, why the heck is this a movie about the Joker and not an original character? And why the heck did you have so much of the film dedicated to Arthur and Lady Gaga's Lee conspiring to have Arthur go all in on his Joker persona, instead of having Lee be Arthur's psychiatrist like Harley Quinn usually is? Only this time, she actually does break through his insanity and helps him become a better man. I actually liked the take of Harley Quinn egging on Arthur, where the Joker is who usually helps Harley fall down the path to the dark side. I thought it was a cool subversion of their usual dynamic, and really fit with this occasionally more meek version of the Joker. But they bungle it by having her only be interested in him because he's a maniacal famous killer from the TV. And the minute Arthur says there is no Joker, she's lost all interest in him. It's an incredibly unsatisfying film, and while I understand that's probably by design, that doesn't make it any less unsatisfying. Congratulations, you succeeded in your goals. That doesn't mean your goal didn't suck. Number 5, Conclave. And we return to the good list with this bad boy. Conclave is more or less a political drama about the intricacies of the selection of a new pope. The movie starts out with 4 main candidates. A traditionalist Italian cardinal named Goffredo Tedesco, a very conservative Nigerian cardinal named Joshua Adeyemi, a rather progressive cardinal from the United States named Aldo Bellini, and a more or less pretty moderate cardinal from Canada named Joseph Tremblay, who is also a deeply corrupt individual. The selection process is led by Ray Fiennes as Colonel Thomas Lawrence, who, in the midst of all of this, is actually going through a bit of a crisis of faith himself. He prays for guidance and wisdom and doesn't feel God's presence when he does. And because of that, he's not really sure that he should be leading this, but he was appointed Dean of the College of Cardinals by the prior Pope, so he does his duty to the best of his ability. This film is filled to the brim with interrogations on spirituality, political intrigue, and some really compelling twists and turns. If you haven't seen the film yet, give it a watch now. It's on Peacock, so you can watch it after a binge of The Office or after you catch up on WWE. Don't go looking for any spoilers or comments about the details of the film's plot. Just watch it fresh. You'll be very surprised by what you'll wind up seeing. Number 4, Furiosa. Chris Hemsworth is so good at being bad, man. Between this and Bad Times at the El Royale, Hollywood really needs to call this guy up more often to be the baddie because he is so great at being Dementus. This character is equally as detestable as he is oddly pitiable. He relishes in the suffering of others, but it's also just about the only way he can feel anything. He latches on to Furiosa because when the world turned upside down and became a wasteland, he lost his wife and children and sees in Furiosa a new daughter to protect and care for. But eventually he realizes she does not see him as a father. He sees him as the scumlord who tortured and killed her mother, and she intends to get as far away from him as fast as possible until he takes away her last chance at a fresh start. And from there, Furiosa decides she needs to make this worthless pile of garbage pay for everything. And it's pretty freaking epic. Not only is Chris great, but Anya Taylor-Joy is especially terrific as Furiosa, while Lucci Holm slides seamlessly into the role of Immortan Joe after the tragic passing of Hugh Keyes' Byrne back in 2020. I genuinely did not realize they were different actors until I looked at the film's Wikipedia page. Alia Brown is also terrific in her scenes as young Furiosa, as a kid and as a teen, and the CGI used to blend her and Anya's face is superb. And that's on top of all of George Miller's jaw-dropping action sequences as per usual. Truly a remarkable film. Number 3, Dune Part 2. I liked the first Dune from Denis Villeneuve well enough, but this movie turned it up to 11. This is the epic space opera that Lucasfilm and Paramount have both been failing to give us for the past 15 years. And I actually liked all those new Star Wars and Star Trek movies that have been dropping in that time. I think The Force Awakens and Star Trek Beyond are some great stuff, but this movie easily outpaces the both of them. I especially love how this takes the space opera genre and just turns it on its head in the last act. Paul isn't Luke Skywalker, a noble hero to fight for the freedom of others. He's not Captain Kirk, a humble explorer, just looking to help out those in need. He might have started out that way, but it's pretty clear that by the end of the film, he's evolved into something much darker. And it's kind of sad given how close we saw Paul and Zendaya's Chani grow to be over the course of the film. But it's also pretty epic to see. Don't tell me seeing Timothée Chalamet as Paul Atreides face off with bald Austin Butler doesn't get you hype, especially when Tim says, "May the knife chip and shatter." Paul's come into his own, and it's amazing to see, even if it is tragic, to see this character who did at one point care about the people of Arrakis use the influence he's built up to manipulate his allies into becoming his servants. Seeing the fulfillment of his villain arc in Dune Messiah is going to be so amazing to watch. I genuinely can't wait. Number 2, Deadpool and Wolverine. So I've seen some people on Twitter really hating this movie, and on the one hand, well, everyone on Twitter hates everything that gets popular at a certain point.
I'm as guilty as sin about this.
But on the other hand, I do kind of get it. I've criticized some other movies for just, indulging in the member berries. Remember this? Remember that? But to be completely honest, I gotta tell you, there is not one movie I had more fun watching this year than Deadpool and Wolverine. I already enjoy the first 2 Deadpool movies, and while I would say the first movie is probably the best movie, this is inarguably the most entertaining movie if you're a fan of comic book movies. Not necessarily comics themselves, although that certainly doesn't hurt, but specifically comic book movies. This movie is a love letter to every single little nerd out there that follows the trades and goes back and forth with other little nerds about casting choices, arguing about whether or not the comic book movies from the early 2000s were any good. Some were, some weren't. And pondering whether or not any of those actors would ever return as those characters. If you knew we were supposed to get a Gambit movie with Channing Tatum as the Raging Cajun at one point before this movie came out, then this movie was made for you. And on top of the fan service, the actual comedy is still on point. Hugh and Ryan as Logan and Wade have terrific chemistry. They're a classic odd couple with the added bonus that they can be as horrifically violent to each other as possible, and neither one will be any worse the wear. Extra points in particular for Hugh returning the role of Logan for the first time in 7 years, and acting like no time has passed at all. The dude played Wolverine off and on for the better part of 17 years, and decided to hang up the claws with Logan, and then decided to come back on a whim because he missed being that guy. He missed making those movies. And you can tell Hugh really does love being Logan. he really does love being Wolverine. He loves being Logan almost as much as Ryan loves being Deadpool, which is really saying something because you can tell Ryan has always loved playing this character. This is just one of those movies where you can tell everyone was having a great time making it, and that comes out on the screen, and that reflects back on you. You're having a great time because everyone else is having a great time. It's good stuff. And before we get to my number one, I'd like to take a few extra minutes to talk about some honorable mentions. These were some movies from the last year that I thought were pretty freaking great, but just not good enough to get into the list proper. Let's go. Number one, Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul. Shitting in the opposite direction now, which is why it's only an honorable mention as opposed to Woman of the Hour. This movie premiered on BBC on Christmas Day 2024, but it actually landed on international screens on Netflix on January 3rd, 2025. That being said, however, the movie was a load of fun and has some especially poignant commentary on the state of creatives in the entertainment industry right now. The film opens with Gromit lovingly tending to his flower garden. It's clearly hard work, but it's something Gromit clearly enjoys. Wallace, however, just sees that Gromit is spending a lot of time something that's very labor intensive and thinks that his good old Pooch would appreciate having something to do the work for him. So he creates a robotic gnome to do just that. But Gromit doesn't actually appreciate the gnome very much, seeing it as something that doesn't really make his job easier, it just makes the garden into a bunch of ugly cube shapes. Gromit, in fact, doesn't actually like many of his owner's inventions in general because all they do is take the place of doing things that he actually enjoyed doing, like making tea with an old-fashioned kettle instead of one of Wallace's duads doing it for them. This feels like Aardman Animations making a commentary on things like generative AI. It's a useful tool for people who don't actually care about making things, but all it does is create boring slop that's not particularly creative. It's undermined a little bit by the film's ending showcasing Wallace and Gromit finding a balance between the usefulness of automation and still doing things for yourself, like the gnome doing more creative work at the flower garden, while Gromit is actually making his and Wallace's tea, and Wallace is actually basically patting his dog instead of using a machine to do it instead, which is admittedly pretty touching. Confusing commentary aside, Bayless McGraw is a stupendous villain. Equal parts funny, intimidating, and clever. His plans are sort of simple, but really quite brilliant. Oh, that dim-witted inventor made a robot, and he installed it with the capacity to be evil? Well, don't mind if I do. And then he tells the original gnome bot to make copies of itself, and from there, he just lets Wallace do the thing he always would have done. Send the little guys out to do some gardening work for everyone in town, and while no one's looking, they steal from everyone's tool shed, and anything metal that happens to be in their backyard. And then they use that equipment and that metal to bust their new master out of prison. After that is stop back at Wallace and Gromit's flat to take back the diamond he stole in the wrong trousers all the way back in 1993. And he's off to enjoy the fruits of his labor with a discredited and incriminated Wallace. Ain't life grand? The thing I love most about Wallace and Gromit is the way the animal characters manage to communicate with just gestures, expressions, and body language. I'd say the standout example of this in the film is actually Feathers hacking into Wallace's computer. We see him typing away at the computer to try and gain access to Wallace's desktop, and all of a sudden he's locked out and has to guess what Wallace's password is. His first two guesses are pretty logical. Gromit, dog, and inventor, with the letter I in both words being replaced with a 1, and the O in inventor being replaced with a 0. But they're both misses. And after each miss, we see him scratching his head and rubbing his chin, tapping the desk like he's really racking his brain about this, until he spies a picture of Wallace and Gromit in the paper with Wallace holding a big old chunk of Swiss cheese. And Feathers smacks his head like it just clicked with him, and he's realizing how freaking obvious what the password is. He types in the word cheese, and it's a hit. This is another big win for Aardman. Way to go, you guys. Number 2. Love Lies Bleeding. I need someone to love me the way Kylie Chi loves Katie O'Brien. Good God. Every day I open up my Twitter and I grumble to myself how much I hate that I still use this godforsaken app. But after that, I see a tweet from Kylie gassing up her lady love like she's the coolest person alive. Lord Jesus, I see what you are doing for others, and I want that for me. Amen. Jokes about my own longing aside, I do kind of hope one of these days we get to see a romantic film centered on a muscular woman that isn't filled with horrific violence and steroid-induced hallucinations. It's not that those things are bad for films. I just want to see like a straightforward romantic comedy where one of the leads is a woman that's just jacked to the gills. Would that be so terrible? Gripes about the lack of wholesome entertainment centered on women built like Miss O'Brien. This is a pretty solid crime thriller. Lots of pulpy goodness. It feels like a really good exploitation film from about 50 years ago. Katie plays Jackie, a drifter with big dreams about becoming a bodybuilding champion, who bumps into Lou, a New Mexico local who runs a gym in her small town under the watch of her crime lord father. The two strike up a romance that eventually culminates in Jackie brutally murdering Lou's brother-in-law with her bare hands because he's an abusive husband who deserves to die. This in turn leads to a whole lot of drama surrounding Jackie having to eventually go on the run from Lou's crime lord dad. It's a crazy ride that's also frequently quite sweet and even a bit sexy, but it still takes some really freaking weird turns. If you heard about this movie and thought it was just some sweet romantic comedy between Kristen Stewart and some bodybuilder chick, you have been misled. This is an extremely violent and deeply weird film, and it's so awesome. Give it a look. Number 3, Fly Me to the Moon. In all honesty, I'm putting this one as an honorable mention less because of the movie it was, and more because of the movie it wasn't. When I first saw the trailer and saw that the premise was about the filming of the moon landing and it being fake, I was a little bit angry because I assumed this was going to be some crappy anti-science movie disguised as a goofy rom-com. But one weekend, my mom said she was going to see the movie with a group of friends and asked if I wanted to tag along. I was a little reluctant to say yes, but I wanted to hang out with her, so I said sure. And then to my pleasant surprise, the movie wasn't about faking the moon landing, but actually faking the faking of the moon landing. The moon landing itself in the film is entirely real, but members of the CIA believe that the mission is doomed to fail, so they work with NASA's PR team to film a fake landing to broadcast to the American public, regardless of if the landing is successful or not. But Channing Tatum, as NASA's launch director, works with the same PR team to fool them into thinking they are broadcasting the fake landing, while the real landing is what actually plays. I really figured this was going to be some stupid anti-science movie playing to the conspiracy theorists, but to my immense relief, that wasn't it at all. I also really liked Channing and ScarJo as the leader of the PR team as a couple. They had some pretty solid chemistry, and I was really glad to see them get together in the end. I also really appreciated the way the two of them kind of politic their way into making sure NASA gets the funding it needs, especially in the scene where Scarlett and Channing are having dinner with a very conservative senator and his wife, and the senator argues to Channing that wanting to touch the stars is heretical because that is God's domain. But Channing counters that in his mind, exploring the universe is perhaps the greatest way we can honor God, by getting a closer look at the things he created. As someone who appreciates science but does his best to be a faithful man of God, I really like the fact that these filmmakers gave voice to that perspective. Understanding the functions of the universe is not antithetical to religious views, and to say otherwise is more than a little short-sighted. Short-sighted from both ends of the spectrum, to be clear. Not just from religious people, but also from science people who are anti-religious. You can appreciate science, you can respect science, and want to know more about the world and the universe while still believing in God. That is a possibility. So yeah, after Love, Simon, I think we can put another win on the board for Greg Merlanti. Nice job. Number 1, The Wild Robot. Not gonna lie, when I first saw the teaser for this movie, I was pretty hyped. But when I saw the actual trailers and they showed all the talking animals, I was a little bit concerned. I kind of liked the angle of a machine just observing nature and having to navigate its way through peacefully cohabitating with everyone in the wilderness. But I didn't want what seemed like kind of a typical Disney movie with talking animals that act like people. What I actually got was somehow the best of both worlds, mixed with some especially poignant themes about parenthood and growing up and discovering a new identity for yourself. Rosm Unit 7134's transition into Roz is genuinely fascinating to me. Another YouTuber by the name of For Shame did a video a few years back commenting on robot characters in film, primarily in animation, and noted that the best robotic villain was actually Otto from WALL-E, a character who worked because it wasn't a malicious character. It was a machine following its programming to the letter. It was instructed to not return to Earth no matter what. So if the planet Eve and WALL-E discovered means that the ship can return to Earth, then it needs to be disregarded and even destroyed because it is a threat to Otto's ultimate mission: keep the ship in space. I bring this up because I think it's a really great contrast to why Roz works as a heroic robot character, unlike someone like Otto or even Big Hero 6's Baymax. Roz's character is about increasingly becoming more human, because her mission revolves around raising an animal into adulthood. And as her mission progresses, she increasingly realizes that being a mother is more complex than her original programming is capable of handling, so she continually has to rewrite her own code because it is the only way to make sense of her task. And as a consequence of that, and just plain spending a whole year in the wilderness, Roz slowly becomes more and more unrecognizable from the robot that first emerged from the Rosm Corporation at the start of the story. And the actual relationship between Roz and Brightbill, the ghost she takes in and raises, is just the sweetest thing. By the end of the film, you really do feel their bond as a mother and a son. And the last scene together really does just kill me. And a special shout out to both the stellar cast and the absolutely incredible animation from director Chris Sanders, who co-directed How to Train Your Dragon and Lilo and Stitch with Dean DeBlois. This was the last movie DreamWorks handled themselves, with all future projects now being done as joint ventures with Sony Pictures Imageworks. And what a last hurrah in that case. One of the company's absolute best. 2024 was a great year for art and entertainment. I think we're going to really miss those first 10 months of it. Hopefully 2025 gives us more great stuff to love, and hopefully the year itself can shape up. It doesn't look good right now, but that's usually when someone comes in and saves the day, so knock on wood. So, what's next? Well, WrestleMania is right around the corner, so what's next is a couple of videos discussing a couple pretty cool WrestleMania stories. The rise of WWE Champion Kofi Kingston, and John Cena and The Rock's rivalry from 2011 to 2013, so stay tuned for that. And if you're not here for the wrestling content, fear not, we'll be getting back into some anime business with my review for Spy X Family Code White, and a long overdue discussion of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Season 2. So if that's piquing your interest, be sure to stick around in the meantime. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, and all the other good stuff. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you all for your patience. I really hope you're all having a great 2025. Woodstock, out.